All right, so at this point, what I want to look at is some terms that we've had in the past related to data, looking at the spread of data. We're getting into our central question of how is data spread, and also looking at distributions and that sort of thing. But I want to revisit some of these terms and hopefully remove a little bit of the mystery that might be in some of these, okay? Because this isn't just something that you need to memorize, all right? This is something that if you understand, you won't have to memorize, okay? Now, range, the distance between the highest and lowest value, okay? That's our max minus our min. If you just think about that concept, distance, how much is it spread? What's the distance from the lowest to the highest value? That's our range, okay? Quartiles and IQR. This is where I want to pause for a second, and I want to look at our data kind of visually, all right? Let's say that this is our data. Quartiles, what's the root word of quartile? Quart, or quarter, yeah. So, and a quarter is how much?
25%.
Yeah, it's 25%, okay? So if we were going to be cutting this thing into quarters, how would we do it? If I asked you to cut that into quarters, what would you probably do first?
You cut it in half and then...
Yeah, cut it in half. So I'm going to cut it in half here. And by the way, if I cut it in half, how much do I have on either side? 50%, all right? Now, I just found the middle, all right? What did we say is the middle of our data? It's our median, okay? Now, another thing I want to ask is, how many quarters do I have there?
Like on each side?
Yeah.
We have 4 on each side, so like 8 total, right?
No.
4 total.
There's 4 quarters, so how many are on the left, how many are on the right?
Oh,
2 and 2, okay? So, we actually could call this our second quartile, right? Second quartile.
How do we know it's not the third?
Well, let's think about it, okay? Let's look at it. If I were going to continue to cut this whole thing into quarters, now that I've cut the whole thing in half, what would I do?
Make it 8. No, you'll do it sideways like that.
If you cut a quarter,
No, don't cut
into
it like this.
quarters, it would be 8.
Oh.
He's not cutting a quarter into a quarter.
Come on, you guys are way overthinking here. If I just cut it in half and you wanted to cut it into quarters total.
You just do each one.
All right, yeah, cut each one in half. There we go. Okay, so we're going to cut that one in half. We're going to cut this one in half. All right, and now notice a couple of things. Each one of these is going to be 25%, right?
Oh, I see.
So we could actually kind of redefine our idea of a median. It is the middle, but it's the score that's bigger than 50% of our data. Okay? Also, if I've gotten up to this 25% mark, how much of my data have I gone through already?
25%.
Yeah, or a quarter. Yeah. So I would call this value here, the value that's bigger than 25% of my data, I would call that my first quartile. That's my first quartile. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little better.
Then that will be the third quartile, and the last one will be the fourth quartile.
That's right, okay? This would be the third quartile. And if you wanted to call that the fourth quartile, you could, but what do we call that?
The whole.
The whole thing? Or so what's that value at the very end?
100.
The max. There's our max. Okay? And what was the lowest value?
The minimum.
The min, okay? So if you think of quarters, you know, and remember that yes, the median is one of our quartiles. The max is one of our quartiles. It's the fourth quartile, okay? If you want to, you know, don't get used to calling it that, but at least think in terms of that. That kind of removes the mystery, because a lot of students will look at it and be like, where'd the first and third come from? What happened to the second one? Well, the second one's just the median, okay? And also, noticing the 25% marks, okay? This includes 25% of the data, okay? So another way that you could kind of think of that first quartile is, it is the score, as we have, whoa, why is that not moving? Okay? The first quartile is the value that is greater than 25% of the data. Okay? The median is the value that is greater than 50% of the data.
It's greater than?
Yeah. Think of it in terms of a kind of a concept rather than an actual score. All right? It's the value that's greater than 20 or 50% of our data. Okay? Another term that often students are a little bit confused about is this idea of the interquartile range, or the IQR. Okay? Here's where it helps to know your Latin prefixes. Okay? So, you have inter. Inter, what does that mean? Within or... Okay, within or between, something like that, okay? Within or between. So if you understand that prefix, then this term is actually really easy to remember. It is the range of values between the quartiles. Okay? That's the IQR, interquartile range. So it makes sense that we would subtract the max of that range, Q3, minus the min of that range. Okay? The quartiles we're talking about are the first and third quartiles. Alright? We could also describe this as the range of what part of our data? The data between the first and third quartile is what part of our data? How could you describe it? Huh?
The first half.
Not the first half.
Excuse me.
50%.
Call it something.
It is 50%.
Oh, the middle.
Middle 50, yeah. The middle 50%. Now this is significant because if you think about it, okay, we've talked about like symmetrical or skewed distributions, but another thing that we sometimes think about is, you know, is more of our data kind of in the middle, or what's the spread of our data as we are close around the median as opposed to those outer values, okay? Let's say you had a range, a total range of say 60, but your IQR was only 10. What would that tell you about your data? If your total range was 60, but your IQR was only 10.
There's a lot in the outside. No.
Concentrated, right?
What do you mean?
Like, if the interquartile range is so small, then all the data is like concentrated around the mean, probably, right? Like, there's a lot of.
Well, that's the thing. In between the quartiles is still 50% of all your data. And on the bottom end, there's still 25%, and on the top end, there's still 25%. What does it tell us about that middle 50, though? You're on the right
It's close
track.
Together.
That middle 50 is really close together. It's in a range of only 10 units, right? But the fact that our total range is 60, what does that tell us about the stuff outside the middle 50?
It's really spread out.
It's really spread out, okay? So seeing that value can tell us something about our data, okay? The middle 50 was really consistent in their scoring, but then you had some that were really high, or that top 25% were kind of all over the place. The bottom 25% were kind of all over the place too. They were really spread out. But it tells you a little bit about that. Now, if you had a range of 60 and your middle 50 was 30, had a IQR of 30, we might start thinking, okay, this might be pretty symmetrical, okay? Because if our IQR is exactly half of the whole range, that's kind of what we would expect the middle 50 to be. So it might be that our data is pretty evenly spread out across everything. All right, now you would want to look at more than just those two numbers, but that's something to consider, okay? So, real quick here, we're going to try two of these. What would our range for this data be? I already put them smallest to largest because I assume you can do that by now. Okay, so our range is 20. All right, from 78 to 98 is 20. What would our median be? 87, okay, that's our middle score here, 87. How about our Q1? 84, 83 and a half,
I think we're counting from
83.75.
Are we counting from 87?
Well, that's kind of a question that we got to answer, right? Do we include the 87, or do we just do the middle of the bottom four scores?
Isn't that up to us personally? But wouldn't 87?
No, it's not up to you
Yeah,
personally.
it's just math. It's up there.
Wouldn't 87 be the second quartile?
Okay, good. 87 is our second quartile, all right? We're looking for the first quartile, all right? That's the middle of the bottom 50%. We said the second quartile is the value that's greater than 50% of our data, right? So we would only use these four values.
So the second quartile is just one number.
It's a number, yeah.
It's just
In the second
Is this not a
quartile,
range?
if there were 10 numbers instead of 9 numbers, would it be the average of the two in the middle, right?
That would be your second quartile or your median. That's correct. And we're actually, the next one we have has a even number.
So,
So we'll look
median
at that.
and second quartile are the same thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So what is our first quartile in this case? 83.5. That's right. 83.5. And then what would Q3 equal? Good, 95.5. It's going to be halfway between 94 and 97. Okay? So IQR? IQR is 12. Very good. Okay, that's not too bad, right? Something you've probably done before.
Wait, how did you get 12?
Someone explain?
Subtract Q1 from Q2.
Okay. It's the range between the quartiles.
Okay.
Okay? So the range between those would be 12 units. All right, let's do with an even number of data points. Okay? There's 20 there. So what's our range, first of all?
14.
14, good. From 1 up to 15 is 14. The median. If we have 20 scores, where's the median?
That's 10.5.
Okay, it's between the 10th and 11th score, right? So if our 10th score is right here, and our 11th score is right there, what is the median?
6.
It's 6, that's right. Now, this is where drawing it is helpful. Our median is right here at 6. So how would I find the first quartile?
It's from the ones after the line, before the line.
Yes, and look, do you hear how she described that? Can you say that again?
The numbers before the line, including the 6, which is
Including the 6. Notice the median is actually between these two 6s. Even though they're all the same numbers, remember I said think of the median as a concept, not an actual score. Okay, you don't just circle both of those and oh, that's the median. The median lies between those. So when you're finding Q1, you will use that 6 and find the middle of all those scores. Does that make sense? Okay. So what's our Q1 in this case?
4.
4. Yeah, it's going to be right here between those two 4s. Okay. Now this one you would have gotten a little kind of lucky on with Q1 because it wouldn't have mattered if you messed up and didn't count the 6. But on the right hand side it would make a difference.
It would be between 6 and 15, right?
It would be, yeah, from this 6 all the way to 15. What's the middle value there?
9.5.
That's right. It's going to be halfway between the 9 and the 10, so 9.5.
I like this.
Okay? So what's our range between the quartiles, the IQR?
5.5.
5.5. Okay. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's the basic idea. We're going to work on actually using these to make box plots a little bit later. Let me just, though, introduce you to the idea and an important topic here, important term, is this term 5-number summary, okay? That is a term that if I tell you, hey, what's the 5-number summary, I expect you to know what's incorporated into that. Notice, though, it's really just all the quartiles. You have the minimum, which you could kind of call the Q0 if you really wanted to. The minimum, it's at the 0% mark, and then you have 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%. Okay? So it's basically what are the 5 points that divide this whole thing into quarters? Alright? So you have the minimum, the lower quartile, the median, the upper quartile, and the max. And you'll notice all of these end up on the box plot. We've done box plots a little bit in the past. We're going to do it a little bit more today, now, and also look at interpreting them more. We're going to spend more time interpreting than we are just making them. Okay, so you see this example, and just to kind of recap what we've talked about. Okay, the box going from Q1 to Q3, we already said that's the middle half or the middle 50%. Okay? And then this lower whisker, that's everything below the first quartile, so you guys know that's the bottom 25%. Everything above the third quartile up to the max, that's another 25%. So that's the highest 25% or the top 25%. Okay? Yes?
So when you ask us what's the 5-number summary, you want us to tell the maximum value? Just those?
All 5 of those, yep. The 5-number summary. Okay? Now, I list, we're not doing that. I did list 3 different problems back here. However, this number 3 in the middle is not one of your required, so just follow the required IP.
Wait a second, I have a question.
for practice, yes.
Back to what we were on before,
Mhm.
the